I was about to go outside, right? But I tried to sit down out there and it's just too windy. It's just too much noise. So I was worried this microphone was going to pick that all up. So I've had to come inside and sit down on the couch here, guys. How are you going? I wanted to chat to you today about how deep you should go when learning English. So this came up. I recently put up a video saying that I was interested in learning Italian, Spanish, and French, as well as Portuguese at the same time. Now, looking back, that was probably very, very ambitious. In fact, over ambitious. And it really ties in with how deep I want to go in those languages. So for a long time, I've been watching guys on YouTube who are polyglots, right? You guys have probably seen those polyglots who like to learn a lot of different languages, and they tend to learn them for a year or two intensively, and then they move on to the next language. But something I've always wondered with these guys is how deep they get into each language, to what level they get in each language. You know, if you were to talk about the different levels, A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2, at what level can you get to in those languages when you just spend 1 or 2 years studying that in your own time? And I guess the biggest thing is that every time I saw these guys speaking, my assumption was always that they were at native level, right? When you've got no background in the language that you're hearing someone else speak, it's quite easy to overestimate their abilities in that language, right? That happens to me sometimes with Portuguese, where I'll be speaking with Kel or with other Brazilians, and I can speak moderately well. I would consider myself basically fluent, very basically, in that I can communicate. I can talk to people who don't speak English and I can get my ideas across, although it's very clunky. I make a lot of errors and it's nowhere near as good as my English, right? But I often have people ask me, how did you get so good at Portuguese? It seems like you speak like a native, when that is so far from the case. So it made me realize that a lot of these polyglots, you would imagine, and again, I can't tell you, maybe they are freaks who do speak every single language as fluently as they speak their mother language, but I really doubt it. And I would say that a lot of them tend to overplay it, show off a bit, and whether or not they explicitly tell other people that their levels are very high, they allow other people to think that their levels are very high in all of the languages that they're learning, right? Or at least more so than they probably think themselves. And so I noticed that, at least with French more recently, that I spent years learning at school, and then I spent another few years recently, maybe 2 years ago, learning intensely on my own. I got it to a pretty good level, but it quickly diminished, and I lost the ground that I had sort of made in that language really quickly. But I found that speaking has diminished a lot. I can't express my ideas anywhere near as well as I used to be able to, but I can hear and listen to things incredibly well, and I still understand the majority of what's going on, you know, although I need practice, obviously. So why am I talking to you about this today? I was reassessing my sort of plan with learning Italian, French, Portuguese and Spanish at the same time, and there were two things that I sort of came up. I was chatting to a friend, Shana, about this, and she's like, one, these languages are too similar and you're going to confuse yourself, and two, if you're learning so many at once, you may be able to sort of, you know, learn a little bit from each one, but you won't get very far with them. So it made me sit down and think, what do I really want out of the languages that I'm learning? Do I want the same thing from all of the languages that I'm learning? And when will I be happy? At what level in each of these languages am I aiming for? And I had to sit down and I was thinking, okay, Portuguese is the primary language for me. My wife speaks Portuguese. Our son, who is going to be born in 3 or so months, will hopefully be learning Portuguese from birth, or hopefully will be learning Portuguese from birth. And I want to be able to speak to him as effortlessly as possible. I'm never going to be native, but I want to aim to be as good as possible. So straight off the bat, it's obvious that I need to spend the majority of my time focusing on Portuguese and not focusing on the other languages that may be useful in other realms, other areas of my life, at some point in the future, but currently they're not anywhere near as useful as Portuguese is, which I'm speaking on a daily basis. So I want to get a very, 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 very good level of Portuguese. All right, so aside from that, so that sort of shifted me to now focusing effectively 80% of my time on Portuguese, and I dabble a little bit with the others, thinking that, I'll just expose myself to Italian and Spanish a little bit over time, and when I have more time and when my Portuguese is at a much higher level, maybe I'll focus on them more heavily. What was I going to get onto with Portuguese? But yeah, I really reassessed it. It's so funny. I speak with Kel every day in Portuguese, and for probably 5-6 hours a day, but it's always the same stuff, right? So I've really noticed recently when I catch up with other friends who are Brazilians, especially with a group of them, every time I do that, it's a bloody strong reality check. Every time. I feel like I'm gaining a lot of ability in Portuguese. I can speak with Kel naturally about the things we're always talking about, which tend to be the same things, which is why I'm getting good at saying the phrases that I'm using all the time. But whenever there's a group of them, it's like the difficulty level goes from what I'm used to hardcore mode. And I get a reality check and realize that my Portuguese is horrible compared to what I thought it was when I was just speaking one-on-one with Kel. And so that, you could go either way, right? You could use that to be a bit demotivated and not feel good about yourself. But I use that to be like, all right, I'm going to push harder. I'm going to try and learn even more. I'm going to try getting even deeper into this language. And that's why I sort of wanted to make this video today. I wanted to ask you guys, when you're learning English, how deep do you want to go? What level do you want to get to? And what is your plan for getting to that level? Because I found with myself, with learning Portuguese and French and Italian and Spanish, quite often it's pretty easy to think you're doing a lot when you're playing around with Duolingo, when you're watching YouTube, when you're reading a book, but you're not really actively studying, right? So it's easy to get distracted, and it's easy to think you're doing a lot when you may not really be doing a lot. And it's the same, maybe you're in Australia, maybe you're living in Melbourne, you're from China, you're from Japan, you're from France, you're from Brazil, and you go out and you can sort of kind of talk with people, your level's sort of basic fluency, right? But you know that every time you're in a group, you find it incredibly difficult. Or every time you watch movies, you get a bit lost because there's still a lot of vocab you don't know. What is your plan to learn that stuff, right? To learn that vocabulary, to learn those expressions, to be able to understand when multiple people are speaking all at once in a group. What is your plan to get from where you currently are to get to the point where you can understand those people? And I guess more importantly, is that your goal, right? Because for me, in languages like French, Italian, and Spanish, it'd be cool, it'd be amazing to speak them close to natively, but I'm pretty aware of the chances of that happening are incredibly, incredibly small, right? So I have to sort of decide, okay, I have to give myself a reality check and say, I'm just going to study those languages to try and get a bit of exposure, because I just want the ability to sort of be able to communicate if I'm on holiday, right? So I know I don't want to go too deep in those languages because it would mean sacrificing how deep I can go in Portuguese. And that is my primary goal, right? So if you're learning English, I want you to be thinking about how deep do you want to go? Do you want to get to the point where you speak like a native speaker? If that is the highest goal possible, whether or not the average person can do it, if you imagine that is the extreme, and say at the bottom of that, the basic ability is being able to ask for directions, basic fluency, communicate when you're on holiday. Where between those two extremes do you want to go? Firstly, how deep do you want to go in the language? And secondly, how are you going to get there? Okay, so that's basically why I wanted to do this video today, to chat to you about that and get you thinking about these things in English, because maybe you don't want to get to a point where you sound like a native speaker when you're speaking English, right? Maybe that's not your interest at all. Maybe your basic fluency in that language is all that you're after. You just want to be able to travel and communicate with people, even if you can't understand conversations about astrophysics with 10 people talking in a group. Maybe that's not what you want, right? And so if that's not what you want, you shouldn't give yourself a hard time for not achieving that, right? But if it is something that you want, you should also, pull your thumb out, pull your finger out, get off your ass, and work out a plan of how to approach that goal or that sort of destination. Whether or not you'll ever get there, you need to be aiming for it and at least moving in that direction as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Okay, so that's probably enough from me rabbiting on today, but it's what I'm thinking about with Portuguese at the moment. I want to get deep in the language. I want to reach as high a level of fluency, proficiency as I can, as soon as I can. So it means doing more every day, listening to podcasts, watching movies with subtitles on, without subtitles, multiple times, going to parties with Brazilians, speaking for 8 hours. I did that last weekend. We had 4 people come over to have dinner with us, have lunch with us. They stayed from 12 until 8 or 9 p.m. and we just spoke Portuguese the whole time. I was so exhausted after that, but it was such a good experience. And every time I notice how much my Portuguese jumps up a little bit, right? It's those little gains where you've learned a bunch of vocab, you've done a lot of exercise, right? And so, yeah, I don't know where I was going with that point, but that happened to me recently, and that's kind of what's motivated me and shown me how much I still have to learn. It's made me want to work out a plan to get to that goal. And it's also made me see that I want to get to that goal, okay? And how I need to treat the other languages that I'm also interested in learning in the future, okay? Anyway, thank you so much for joining me, guys. I am Pete from the Aussie English Podcast. If you're interested in learning Australian English or advanced English, check out the podcast. And if you would like to get access to my 50+ courses, English courses, advanced English courses, pronunciation, connected speech, expressions, and just content, right? I like to talk about Australia, about biology, about all kinds of things, history and culture. Go to theaussieenglishclassroom.com and you can try it for a small fee for the first month. Get in there, guys. You've got nothing to lose and your English will skyrocket after a very short period of time of working your ass off. I'll see you in there.